And we'll go to apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Convoy, Councillor Hassel, and Councillor Wakefield.
Thank you. I think that was Wakeford, but
Sorry.
that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I'm sure you won't mind. Thank you very much for that. Item 1, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of October. Is it your wish that I sign those as a true and correct record? All those in favour? Thank you very much. Item 2, members' interest to receive from members declarations as to disclosable pecuniary, other registrable and non-registrable interests in relation to any agenda item. Are there any members wish to declare? No, thank you. So we'll go straight to item 3, which is review of the council's risk management strategy. Councillor Mickelberg.
Watch those films where they have people up in a line and people turn around and say, would something like to, if you'd like to volunteer, step forward. And everybody else is in on it except one person, and everyone else steps back and one person looks as if they've stepped forward. That's how I feel a little bit this evening with the risk management strategy piece. I can understand why. I ran a ISO 27001 certified data center for 5 years. I've helped put a couple of companies through that certification. With accreditation, if you do anything, more or less, that isn't based on risk, you fail your audit. And it's a really useful and important way to frame and think about everything that it is that you do, and how you adjust, and also how you think about the positive aspects. Because people look at risk and they think to themselves, oh, it's about the bad things. Actually, you want to cross the road. There's risk involved in crossing the road, but there will be a purpose for what it is that you want to be crossing the road for, and in doing so, you will gain benefit. And therefore, risk is a two-sided thing. We need to balance what we're doing in terms of financial risk or people risk, and we also need to be doing that in terms of the endeavour and moving the services and the services that we offer and the district itself forward. And in order to do that, you've got to have a framework. You've got to be able to have a reference. You've got to be able to point people who perhaps don't put risk-based decision-making at the front of their minds at something that allows them to then think about that and encompass it, and then to bring it into the way that they operate and how they interact then with other people around decision-making. So the strategy that's been put together is based on the Orange Book, which is a government framework. It covers all of the key items that are necessary for taking a view at risk, a holistic view at risk, and then understanding the items that are important, that you need to mitigate, that you need to think about, but also then understanding those areas that you're quite happy to tolerate, because actually these are day-to-day things that should come through during the course of operations. It was put to the overview and scrutiny panel. The panel were positive about it. I pick out a couple of the comments that came, which I think are quite helpful. Particularly, Councillor Jennings was making positive comments about how he liked the fact that we were trying to set a defined risk appetite, and it was trying to clarify and simplify the process that we were going through. There were some helpful comments about how certain risks that appeared in the report were then not corresponding in other places, and that perhaps therefore weren't being picked through, or we weren't being quite as holistic about making sure that we're capturing things and bringing them together so that we can make good decisions in a combined, or get the best word for this, in a consistent manner. There was some concerns again just about bits of ownership and around elements of the staffing side of things, and whether or not, particularly looking at the 3C shared services legal team, whether they'd be able to recruit the necessary skills and capabilities into that team to be able to help us move forward from the risk management side of things. Hopefully, if you look through it, hopefully you agree with comments that came from overview and scrutiny, and that it's a good piece of work that we should take forward. And as we sit here, we are being asked to review and propose that the strategy is put forward to full council.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments at all from members? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
How would you say that this strategy treats or addresses reputational risk?
Wouldn't be able to be precise enough to answer that question. I think as I've looked through it, having been on the periphery of creation of it and reviewing through it, I'm not sure there's anything that is specific about reputational risk. It's certainly a point to feed in if you think it is absent. And I certainly can pass that across to Ollie to pick up on from a detail point of view.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Davenport-Ray. I think just to supplement Councillor Mickleburgh's sort of feedback there, if I could draw your attention to page 22 of the document and the risk categories there. So in the construction of this document, it's drawn on a number of places. So one would be the Orange Book, which is the government's sort of approach to risk within the public sector. But also the LGA audit, the peer review we had of our own audit function, the recommendations they made. So within the Orange Book, there is a sort of standard sort of 13 categories around types of risks that you might want to consider within the organisation. One of the reflections that we made in response to that is at times at a functional level, if you're, for instance, a technical officer within a service trying to distinguish the difference between contractual risk, legal risk, political risk can be quite a daunting prospect. And actually what we want here, to absolutely the point that Councillor Mickleburgh has made, is a functional approach to risk that really sort of spans across the culture of the organisation. So what we've done is try to come up with sort of 7 risk categories, which are really simple and easy to understand. And within that, I think what you'll see is one around customer and reputational risk, which absolutely speaks to that core point, with some trigger questions that ask people to consider the kind of things that might create a reputational challenge to the council that we might want to be aware of, to document and to mitigate and respond to. So I think at a sort of highline level, that reputational factor is absolutely there. But I think under sort of, what draws through everything we're trying to do in terms of risk is ultimately it's about delivery, it's about strong governance, it's about financial control. And I think that's written sort of large through the document. And I'd hope you'd agree that kind of spans across everything that this document is trying to achieve.
Thank you. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. I've written a few risk assessments in a time. I think I've initially found them slightly bewildering and got through sort of boring, and now kind of actually really value them now because it essentially you're setting down on paper an approach to any project or initiative or whatever it might be, and actually providing some sort of order to that process. I think it's really helpful. So it's great to see this coming through. I'm interested to hear your view, anyone else's view on have we got the balance right? So I think there's always a risk in any, to use the pun, if you set out process in too much granular detail, that people just rely on the process without kind of stepping back a little bit. And have we got that balance right to ensure that we're using it at the right time to catch those higher level risks without kind of bogging people down unnecessarily in sort of the bureaucracy of the process? So I think the risk would be that people just rely on the process without necessarily taking a step back and understanding where it's going to be most useful. Interested to hear yours, others' thoughts on that.
I think the most important thing is to make people think about risk. So I'll take an example from my working life. Big project that needed to be done, lots of really important deadlines, immovable deadline at the end of it. And I decided I was going to put 2 weeks into the project for snow risk. And you sort of look at that and go, south of England, well, maybe not. But actually one of the sites that I was covering was on Dartmoor, which gets snow. And guess what happened? Rather fortuitously, right in the 2 weeks that I put in, it snowed and we couldn't get to the site, and therefore risk seen, risk averted, risk considered. And some of the people who sat around sort of pointing and laughing at my risk plan weren't pointing and laughing at it. And I think that becomes part of the culture of making sure that we're considering what we're doing, that we're looking and reviewing these things, and we're taking them seriously, but we're not hiding behind them in a bureaucratic sense of, oh, well, it's on the risk register and therefore, but actually living that, making good decisions from it, and then thinking it through and then planning as we go through. So reputational risk perhaps is something relevant from what we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks. But I think Mr. Morley's point is very valid around actually it should be framed within that consistent piece, that whole holistic thinking. But it's got to be a living document. This isn't something we do and then put on the shelf and then say, oh, great, we'll come back to this in 3 years' time, we've ticked the box. Actually, if in 6 months' time we get caught by something because we've not been thinking this through and not been applying it, then actually it's failed.
Okay, thank you. Just coming back to the comments by scrutiny, which I think were all answered. But I note Councillor Harvey was asking for further details of the assurance board, which have now been received. So I think they've all been dealt with from that perspective. And I think this is a good document. I think it's key that we have visibility of where risks are. I know they're not just shared at service manager level, but obviously to senior leadership team as well, and members have sight of them. So I'm happy from the chair to say that we've reviewed the risk strategy and propose that we approve it, propose it be approved by council as well. Somebody like to second? Second that, thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 4, which is financial performance report, Q2. Councillor Mickelberg again.
I think the reason Councillor Wakeford sent apologies is because it wasn't his turn to do every single item this particular week. So again, you have the report for the financial performance for Q2 in front of you. It's best summarised to say that we are at this point expecting an underspend over the course of the year of 1.2 million. Large part of this is made up of additional interest received. I won't go too far into that because otherwise I'm taking the next subject matter away. I think one of the questions that came out of overview and scrutiny from this particular report was whether or not that means that we think we're just going to have £1.2 million at the end of the year to put into reserves. And my observation was that we're 6 months through the year, we're doing better than we were expecting, but equally there's an awful lot of things that are coming at us that we didn't even know about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So the rather surprising news of central government closing the Dolphin Hotel, for example, suddenly sets us in a position that we may find that we're going to have to spend more money than we were expecting in areas of housing, for example. And there are other items that are coming at us from an expenditure point of view where that 1.2 million will very quickly disappear. However, what I would say is that it's been good financial management, it's been excellent work by officers, and it's been hard work all round to ensure that the budget has been run well, that operations have been run well, and that we are in the position that we do need to respond to things with unexpected expenditure. We're in a position to do so, we're in a strong position to do so, instead of having to worry about dipping into reserves or worrying what the impact might be onto our MTFS in future years. So I commend the work that's gone into this. There's a lot of detail in here. I'm happy to take questions around it, but also I would very strongly recommend that we don't get complacent about our financial position and that we work hard to continue the excellent work that's taken us to this position at the 6-month period.
Thank you, Councillor Mickelberg. Any questions at all on this? I agree. I think this is a very good report. And yes, it's positive that we have an underspend, but as you said, it's globally and nationally, the economy is still unpredictable. And this is a short-term underspend, isn't it? May not be there for much longer if we're not careful. So And I believe all the questions from scrutiny have been dealt with. If we just refer back to those,
I can cover those if you wish.
if you can, thank you.
Absolutely. So, a question from Councillor Jennings, which was about what would happen to that surplus and whether it would just roll into reserves. Yes, if we didn't find that we needed to spend, then we would expect to roll that into reserves. But as I said, at the 6-month period, we really shouldn't be that complacent about it. It only takes a small change for that suddenly to turn around and find us in a deficit. There was a question around Fareham project, which is linked to the Commercial Investment Fund, and that the fund or the money for that actually doesn't come out of elements of what we're talking about here because of the nature of reserves and where the funding is coming from. Again, we'll cover that in the Treasury management side of things. There was a question around whether or not we'd be able to spend some money on some watercourse clearing because we had surplus funds. I think this was a very valid point, and it's certainly something that there was going to be some correspondence to outline exactly which watercourses were being suggested and whether or not it would be possible to put some additional funds towards that. There was a question around civil parking enforcement, which was showing in the budget as both a capital and a revenue spend. The difference in that being that capital spend would be things like signs and revenue spend would be elements of legal work and so on. And therefore some parts of that budget have been spent because those elements of work have been completed and others hadn't been. I think that covers all of the questions that were there. But again, overview and scrutiny were positive of the report and the information contained, and we're happy with where we're reporting our financial position to be.
Thank you. I'm pleased to announce some breaking news that the watercourses have been cleared. So Councillor Gardner, if he's watching, will be delighted, I'm sure, with that news. So if there are no further comments or questions about this, I have 2 recommendations. Firstly, to consider and comment on the revenue financial performance to the end of September 2023, as detailed in Appendix 1 and summarised in paragraph 3.2. And B, to consider and comment on the capital financial performance at the end of September 2023, as detailed in Appendix 2 and summarised in paragraph 3.3. Are you happy to propose that, Councillor Mickelberg? Thank you. Seconded. All those in favour? Thank you very much. And moving swiftly on, we'll now go to item 5, which is the Treasury Management 6-month performance review. Again, Councillor Mickelberg, joined by Oliver Colbert. Welcome, Oliver.
I'm delighted that we have the subject matter expert because I'm not sure that I could handle any more data this evening. So I'll pass across to Oliver.
Evening. This is the 6-month report for 23-24 for the Treasury Management. There's a few things that I'd just like to bring to the Cabinet's attention. On the investing side, the rate at which we're investing has increased from 3.96 to 5.29 exactly from March to September. That's with the DMO and money market funds, the rates gone up from 3.6 to 5.2. So the rates are still going up, although they've peaked, I think, probably now. So that feeds into our extra interest that might have got to the top. The balances that we've got at the moment, the cash balances we've got at the moment, are similar to that we had in March. So we've got about 60 million at the moment invested across the DMO and money market funds. On the borrowing side, we haven't had any new borrowing. In fact, we've paid some off, the borrowing that was related to Cambridge Regional College, a loan that we gave them about 5 or 6 years ago. They've now paid their loan off as well, and Hunting and Jim have paid their loan off. So they've both been paid off on time. And finally, the loans that we've the loans that we've got with Cambridge Regional College and Hunting and Jim have both been paid off. And also, just before our Cabinet meeting, Councillor Davenport Ray pointed out that I'd missed a yes out in table 13. So I should probably tell Cabinet that should definitely be a yes, and we have complied with the requirement to keep less than 4 million in the fund. So it's just a typo, basically. Thank you. Any questions you might have?
Thank you, Oliver. Any questions at all? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Oh, so
I have a question about table 13, the same table. So this lists the limits and investment in different areas. Can you tell us more about why most of these areas are down around the 1.8, 1.9 mark, and not we're not using that ability up closer to the limits that have been set?
yeah, those limits are set in the strategy in February. I think at that time we thought we might go up to those limits, but at the moment I'm not taking advantage of that because some uncertainty in the market. So I've tried to keep everything lower than we perhaps would have done in the past. So in the past we probably went up to the 4 million because at that point I think the risk was probably lower. But at the moment I'm thinking the risk is up with interest rates are still possibly climbing, and so is inflation. So there's still some uncertainty in the market. So at the minute, I'm trying to keep them down to 2 million. So the excess funds are going in the DMO, which is backed by the government. So that's far safer. If the market changes, then I expect we'll probably go back up to that limit. So I think probably for this year's strategy, we'll still set them at 4 million. So that gives us the room to put it in there, because the advantage of money market funds is it's liquid, so I can get that out at any time, whereas DMO is fixed to a certain date. So there is an advantage to using money market funds. The returns tend on money market funds to be slightly higher than DMO, although at the minute they're sort of on parity. So there could be a point where the rates of return on the money market funds are higher than DMO. So then again, we'll start to look at using a bit more of the balance that we've got in the money market funds. So it's just a short-term thing, hopefully, at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on the interest rates. They've been a kind of weird for so long that I've kind of almost forgotten what normal feels like. And I'm just interested in your sort of reflection on, so obviously interest rates rising is really encouraging, but it's set against inflation that's significantly more. I guess we needn't feel too comfortable because, our money's not going to go as far. It's interesting to hear your reflection on where we are on that. I don't know where that journey's going at the moment, because what I remember from decades ago doesn't seem to apply anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. Our treasury management advisors are suggesting they'll probably be at elevated levels at 4 or 5% until sort of this time in 2 years' time. So we've got another 2 years probably of elevated interest rates, and then it will drop down to maybe between 2 and 2.5, which will then become the normal in their theory. But who knows? It won't. It's not going to drop back down to 0.1, or that's what they're suggesting. But our investments are, a lot of it are with the DMO, and the rates on those can be a bit more volatile than the general rate with the Bank of England. So although we're looking at large amounts of interest at the moment, it's possible that those the DMO rates might drop down quicker than the actual interest rate. They're linked, but not quite. They're not locked together, but they're linked. So yeah, so I think for next financial year, we're still going to be looking at higher interest rates. The year after, they're going to be dropping slightly. But as you say, I think the inflation's still going to be high as well, isn't it? So it's going to balance out.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at all? And if we dealt with item 6, the comments from scrutiny, we feel we've given them a good airing. Just want to summarise those comments and just our sort of response to them.
Yeah, we had a question about the valuations of the investment properties, and the fact that there were some vacant properties at Rowley, whether that would affect the valuations, which it will do, but obviously we only value annually, so it'll only be taken account of at the end of the year. And then I had a question about liquidity, which is a bit similar to the one we've just been talking about on interest. Is how much cash are we going to have? And at the moment we've got about 60 million, and I think in the shorter term we probably expect that to carry on. So, but it just depends. My answer was that it just depends on what we spend on SIL, really. Because if the SIL receipts are still coming in and they're not going out as fast, then we'll still have a large cash balance. And then the final question was on what we call existing portfolio.
Sorry about that. Sorry, did you finish your point?
No, sorry. The existing
Continue. Sorry,
portfolio.
we're just getting some technical advice. Please continue.
Sorry. What we call the existing portfolio in our report is the old properties. So, council asked if we could split it out a bit, so it's a bit more obvious what it is. It's what we tend to call it in-house because it's the properties that we had before we started buying the SIL ones. So, just a breakdown of that in the next report.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Now, just before we go to the vote, unfortunately, Councillor Taylor, you're not going to be able to vote on this because you had to leave the room. I understand for very valid reasons, but because you weren't here for the debate, so we can't for this item. Because I think you left just as we started this item. So just on a technicality. So please don't take it personally. I understand you had good reasons to. So yeah, that's fine. I hope you're okay. So the recommendation here is to note the Treasury Management performance for the first 6 months of 23-24, to recommend the report to Cabinet for consideration. Council for consideration, to apologise. Thank you. I'm happy to propose from the Chair. Somebody like to second? Yeah. All those in favour? Thank you very much. And moving swiftly on. Thank you, Councillor Mickelberg. You'd be delighted to know you can take a break now, and we'll go straight to item 6, which is the Performance Management Framework. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this should be quite a short item. It was quite a short item, overview and scrutiny. This, it says on the agenda to receive an updated version of the Performance Management Framework, which was approved in 2017. In fact, this is a completely rewritten document, and I think a much better document. And basically, if you read the preamble, what it says, it describes performance management as being about monitoring progress using data as evidence to drive change and inform the actions we take to improve the outcomes for our residents. I don't think this isn't there's nothing in this report which is controversial, but it's a framework that I wish that I'd had when I was a newly elected district councillor, trying to understand how ONS works, how quarterly reporting works. All the papers we've heard tonight are included in this at all. And it also talks about the best value duty for local councils, which is obviously a big issue at the moment at district councils. There were no comments from the ONS panel. I think it's an excellent report and I commend it to you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson, I think you're right. It's also going to be reviewed on a regular basis, isn't it? And I think this fits in with the government's wish for a, is it OFLOG they're going to call it? Sort of local government watchdog, almost, just to monitor what we do. Are there any other questions or comments at all? Councillor Davenport-Ray?
I agree that this is an excellent document, especially page 10, the annual corporate and budget planning cycle, the diagram there. A lot of us learn with pictures rather than words. And for me, this is really valuable. This one page, I have it printed in my office and on the wall. So it's very good.
Thank you. Anybody else? As you said, scrutiny made no comments, so they must have been very happy.
They had plenty of comments from my other papers, Chair, not this one. So we'll come to those in a second. But yeah, I think everybody was pleased with it, and I think there's an acknowledgement that this administration has invited scrutiny, does take data-driven solutions. That's partly because of our own desires, but also partly because we've got a good opposition who tests us on all our points as well. So I think this just lays out the future of performance management at HTC, and I think it's a great document.
Thank you. So nobody else wish to comment? So the recommendations are to approve the revised performance management framework and to authorise the chief executive to set out a timetable for corporate or finance peer challenges and make arrangements for these to take place. So I'm happy to propose from the chair. Somebody like to second? Thank you. All those in favour? That's all approved. And Councillor Ferguson again for item 7, which is the corporate performance report, Q2.
So one of the unusual things about the council cycle is the Q2 report follows hot on the heels of the Q1 report. So I think we discussed that at the last cabinet meeting. I think the performance is still very good. I don't want to dwell too much on individual measures because I think the ONS panel were much less silent on this report than they were on the other reports. So Councillor Harvey in particular raised questions about KPIs 3 and 4, which deal with the amount of time it takes to deliver disability facilities grants, one of which the measures has now dropped into the red. We're expecting it to recover to amber, but we're now predicting that we're not going to meet that target in the full year. There's various reasons for that, partly because of the issues we have with one of our social housing providers at the start of the year, which with the intervention of the senior leadership team, I think that we've resolved yet. But these are really very complex cases. They're not all in the control of district council. We require OT support from the county council. We require Cambridgeshire Home Improvement Agency to do their part. We require be able to tender for the work people to be available. We also sometimes require the residents or the owners to make their properties available. So there's lots of moving parts. But I think Councillor Harvey made the big point that it's easy for us to kind of wave away some of these problems when things switch to amber or red and say we're trying hard to improve them. But each one of those statistics is a real person. And, I've been involved with some casework, as have you, Chair, which, some people's real lives are really affected with it. So I think it's something we really need to keep our eye on. And we need to take these messages and work really hard in that area to make sure that we do our very best to deliver these adaptations so people can live in their homes safely. I think so. The report, as you've noted in previous meetings, has improved a lot. It's improved again after feedback from the ONS panel. And when I read this report, I used to spend most of my time trying to interpret it. Now, most of the data jumps out at me, and I spend more time thinking about the trends and thinking about data and looking at the underlying patterns I do, trying to work out what's happening, which I think is a real victory. It's easier to do that with the quantifiable targets which we've set. We've set targets for most of our corporate objectives, but there's some of them are still based a bit more subjective as well. So Councillor Jennings questioned whether the Riverside Park project was still showing as green when perhaps it should be amber when they've got delays, and those kind of questions are difficult to work out. And I've suggested perhaps in future those are the sort of things that perhaps we should maybe adjust in response to scrutiny's ONS's feedback. Councillor Blackwell expressed a concern about a decline or an increase in staff sickness levels. They've increased from an average of 8 days to 8.2 days, which puts them into the amber. But there was also kind of a worrying observation that there's been a small level of increase in long-term sickness, which again, it's one of those indications that we should be taking care of. Councillor Hassel has already looked into this, and he thinks that those increases are in line with kind of national pictures as well, but he's going to take that up with the Employment Committee. There are also questions about kind of the performance management report shows lots of greens and not many ambers and reds, and whether the targets were set robustly enough. We went through and as the performance management framework describes, we went through a very long and detailed evaluation of all these measures in order to set the performance targets, and I think the ONS committee agreed them at the start of the year. Now, some of these measures are new, and we have to measure them for the first year. And I think as administration, having, if we're going to easily meet some of the targets over a year, then I'm completely in favour of stretching those targets at the end of the year, but not during the middle of the year, because I think that makes no sense as well. So we set the targets with Councillor Mickelberg, Councillor Hassel, myself, and the SLT team spent a whole afternoon going through these and trying to set robust targets. But I think on a yearly basis, when we get to the end of this year, I think it would be a good time to review these and perhaps change a few things, maybe increase some of the targets, maybe decrease some of the targets as well. So I'm completely in favour of setting more robust targets, and I think that's all I have to say on this.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. And I have it on reliable authority that 19 of the 26 targets are above performance level. So it's good, and they're obviously better than last year's. So we are making a lot of good progress.
And it's worth saying that all targets are arbitrary, aren't they? And we need to be careful not to set unrealistic targets which demotivate and discourage people. I think setting stretch targets which are achievable with hard work is a great idea, but that's why we have to have a full year of data for all these measures, so we can evaluate what a stretch performance looks like. So yeah, at the moment I'm very pleased with the report and the performance.
Absolutely. Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Davenport-Ray?
I have a question about performance indicator 12. So this is the planning applications processed on target that are major. Maybe actually this is a question for Councillor Sanderson. So if we look at the graphical interpretation of this, we were doing really well during the first quarter of the year. There is a downward trend. It's not in the intervention area yet. Or hopefully it will never reach there. But are you still confident in what's happening with the major applications being turned around?
Yes, I am. I think the team are on top of it. You're right, there have been some issues, declines in meeting some of the targets, partly because of management issues, recruiting staff. But I'm confident the team that we've got are managing it well. I'll certainly take that back to the head of planning services. I'm having a meeting with her tomorrow, so happy to report back on that. Ollie, and then back to Stephen.
I think just to put some context to Councillor Sanderson's comments as well, I think it's important here that you recognise actually what the indicator is asking and see this in relation to performance against performance indicator 15. So I think the indicator here actually isn't representative of the things that will be important to your residents. So a normal indicator in this area would be the number of days taken on average to decide an application, which would give you a really true sense as to what the level of performance is here. Whereas actually the performance indicator that's set nationally here is the percentage of applications decided within a defined time frame. Now, if you're then an organisation that has a backlog, we've been very open and transparent about that, and to my knowledge, are the only council in the country that openly states our backlog position, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. For every application that you decide that is beyond that arbitrary date, your percentage rate will drop here. So I think whilst the number looks like it's going down, actually that's a sign of progress when seen in conjunction with performance indicator 15. And members might recall that the target set for the end of the year for the backlog of cases was to hit a target of 100. And actually that's been met by September, so 6 months into the year, which I think is testament to really focus and hard work undertaken within Councillor Sanderson's portfolio. So I appreciate that's a slightly technical response, but I thought it might just be a useful context to provide to the question.
Yeah, just to say, when I looked at the graphs, I had a similar concern, but you also have to be careful of variance with small sample sizes. So we're talking about 3 applications out of 17, and there's all sorts of technical reasons why those 3 might have been difficult. So I think that trend is interesting. The reason we have these reports is they're little amber lights going off, so we can note them for next time. We can adjust our strategy if necessary, but I think in this case it looks like it's just a small number, and all the other reasons that Mr. Morley just mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. Recommendation is to consider and comment on progress and performance during quarter 2 as summarised in the corporate performance report attached, and detailed in appendices A, B, and C, which I think we've all done. Are we happy to accept that recommendation or propose from the chair? If that's seconded. And all in favour? Thank you very much. And on to a hat trick for Councillor Ferguson, which is item 8, the Council Tax Support Scheme 24-25.
Don't get many hat tricks, Chair. So this is a really, really important paper and one that I'm really proud of. And I think one will make a real difference to our residents and will serve our corporate objectives. So as an introduction, as you're probably aware, council tax support is a means-tested support scheme that reduces the amount of council tax payable by residents on the lowest incomes. It's one of two benefits which is administered by the district council, the other being housing benefit. Although we administer the benefit for the council tax support for everyone, we only really have any latitude to change it for working age people because the government sets the rules for pension age residents on how much council tax they can receive. So at the moment, if you looked at all the council tax support schemes across Cambridgeshire, at the moment we have the second least generous scheme. A working age person can expect to have a maximum of 80% discount on their council tax, which means they still have to stump up 20%, unless they've got a child under 5, which they can get 85%, or if they themselves or their child is deemed vulnerable, in which in a small number of cases people get 100%. But for most people, they're stuck within that 80 to 85% discount level. So what does that actually mean for a real person? So if you are a single person, age 25, in receipt of universal credit, the standard UC universal credit element, excluding housing support, is £369 a month, which is about £85 a week. With a 80% discount on council tax from that £85 a week, you'd have to stump up £5 a week to pay to district council. So these people are receiving money from the government, because they're in need, and then we're immediately taxing them and taking £5 of that money and put it into district council and county council and parish council coffers. And so that £80 a week would have to cover all their living expenses, food, gas, electricity, water, insurance, travel expenses, whatever. Pensioners, as prescribed by the government, can receive up to 100% support, but working age people currently in Huntingdonshire cannot. So we have the second least generous scheme. Both Cambridge City Council and South Cambs District Council have 100% discount schemes where people can have all of their council tax. A small number of people can have all their council tax council tax discounted. Of course, when we're taxing vulnerable people, with low incomes, it's sometimes difficult to collect that money as well. So I'm not sure how up to date these figures are, but up until recently, the outstanding council tax collections for working age CTS recipients was about £320,000. So even though we tax these people, they don't always pay it. They can't always pay it. Quite often that process of not paying involves, warnings, court summons, which cost £70 each. And so the whole thing can cause a spiral of crisis. So what we're proposing is a banded scheme in which the people most in need can receive 100% discounts on their council support, which is in line with what South Cambs do, what Cambridge City do, and I think about 30% of all councils do now. This scheme will mean that 96% of CTS applicants will have either the same level of support or better or more support. They'll be better off. And about 4% of them, unfortunately, will receive a reduced level of assistance. Now, those 4% of people, we're proposing a hardship fund for 1 year to kind of buffer that effect. So we're going to they won't feel that effect for the first year. There's other reasons for doing this other than just the moral reasons. So because universal credit fluctuates so much, every time you have an income change, your universal credit will change. So about 40% of universal credit claimants have between 8 or 12 changes in the amount of universal credit awarded per annum. And every single one of those at the moment will trigger a change in the council tax support discount as well. Now, if you can imagine, if you're getting like 8 to 12 letters a year every time. It's difficult to plan your finances. In the end, you quite often switch off because it's impossible to track those things as well. So what this is going to do, it's going to put some kind of damping into that system, which means that there'll be less changes. I think I've written it down here. I think we have of order 30,000 changes a year that we have to process at the moment. There's going to be far fewer changes once this, if this goes through, if we approve this. So it means it's much easier for us to administer. Of course, there's going to be a cost to this. So in terms of the district council, it's going to mean that we collect about £70,000 less per year in council tax, which is a cost to us. And the hardship scheme will cost us about £44,000 for that 1 year. And that's going to affect all of the precepting authorities as well. So it would affect the county council much. It's going to cost us about £70,000. It will cost the county council about 10 times as much, so about £700,000, and it will cost all the precepting authorities in total about £1 million per year in across Huntingdonshire in tax they'll no longer be able to collect. But the point I made to the ONS committee is that if we need to raise £1 million, taxing the most vulnerable people in our society is not the way to do it. So we got, I think, a lot of support from the ONS committee. And let me just scroll down to their comments because it's quite a long report. There was one question. So yeah, the question from Councillor Corley was that he was generally in support of this, but he was worried about the effect on other taxpayers and how those fees will be recovered, suggesting that all the other council taxpayers in the district would have to pay more. Certainly from the district council's point of view, one of the reasons we do things like the green bin charging scheme was that so that we can afford to do these things and afford to meet our corporate priorities of keeping people out of crisis and helping people in crisis. So that's not necessarily true, although other authorities will have to make their own decisions. It sounds like a lot of money, but in percentage terms, I think it's about, for the county council, £700,000 is like 0.2% of their total precept. So it's not a massive amount of figures compared to what they actually precept. We did consult on this. There was 75% of people who responded to our proposals were in favour of introducing the scheme. 16% were against, and 9% did not indicate a preference. I think we got about 330 responses, which doesn't seem like a large amount of money, but the consultants we've been working with on this assure us that that is a good response for these kind of schemes. Didn't have a good response from our major preceptors, including we wrote to every single town and parish councils. We wrote to the police, the fire service, county council, and the combined authority. Had very few responses to that. We've chased up all those authorities, and we've had some informal conversations with county council who are not, particularly happy in losing the money, but also they support us and our objectives of helping people in need as well. So I think it's a good scheme, and it's one that's going to have real benefit to the residents who need it most, and one that marries up completely with our corporate objectives.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I think you're absolutely right. And the just beneath the recommendation gives the reasons for this. First one being increasing the level of support for eligible residents directly, those being the most vulnerable. So I think it's very worthy. Absolutely, by all means. Any questions or comments on this from anyone? Councillor Pitt.
So I share Councillor Ferguson's enthusiasm for this change of policy. I think it's absolutely fundamentally crucial that we're doing this. I'm embarrassed to say I was really shocked to find out that we're people that are making do on £80 a week, we were taxing them £5 a week. And, in a cost of living crisis where costs are shooting up, people's incomes aren't moving as quickly, and not least because some of the things that are rising, the inflation is hitting people hardest in food costs and energy costs. And those are the costs that people can't afford to do without. It's not an option to spend that sort of on those items. So I'm relieved that we're able to make this change, and I think we've had to find a way. And as you say, I think it's important to recognise that the green bin charging scheme is something that enables to make these decisions. I guess part of my interest is about how this will impact some of the other councils that are, will be along for the ride with us. I understand the county's, obviously county council has enormous pressures on its own budget, but I'm relieved they weren't against it because I think they recognise it. Again, it's the right thing to do. I'm interested to know what you expect the impact to be on town and parish councils who may not be fully over the detail of this policy.
So we were also asked that question at ONS, but we couldn't really answer it because we hadn't done the tax base calculations at this stage for this year. Katie Kelly, who's in charge of the team, has been rushing through and doing those calculations this week, and so we have some draft figures, which might not be completely correct, but if you look at the calculation, on average across all the parish and town councils, Huntingdonshire will cost them on average about 0.4% of their precept in order to help these people. That goes up a bit for the town council, so I think maybe Huntingdon's going to be about 1% of its precept, and St Neots about the same. Lots of villages have 0%. It depends really how many people who are in receipt of council tax support live in those towns and villages. So obviously some of the towns have more people, but again, I think it's a good use of that money. It's helping people who are in need and probably, downstream saving other costs. If we can keep them out of crisis, it's much better than having to pay to support them when they're in crisis. So I think even though there's going to be a small decrease in the amount of council tax that the town and parish councils received, and I think that's worth it. It's also worth noting that town and parish council precepts aren't limited like district and county council ones are, and town and parish councils can set whatever precept they like. So if they choose to, they can absorb that cost as well.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. Councillor Davenport-Ray?
This is a topic that's very close to my heart. In my day job, I'm helping people who are in debt. And the example of the 25-year-old on universal credit that's outlined in the paper is something that I recognize that I see uncomfortably often. And I think you've correctly identified the administrative burden that chasing this portion of the population costs for the council. But there's also a burden that it creates in the loss of health and well-being of those particular people. So someone who needs to be using all their mental energy to work out how to live on £85 a month, receiving letters chasing them, followed by court summons chasing them, other benefits being denied to them because they haven't paid it. This will provide a great relief for that, and I think help us also fulfill that objective we have of encouraging the health and well-being of all of our residents.
Absolutely. And I think Councillor Pitt also put that very well. I mean, one of the items here is reduction in caseload. So, of course, you're saying £70 a week to send £70 per letter for a court summons to chase somebody who's probably owing not much more than that. It's not a good use of our resources, is it? And this will help the people most in crisis, very much so. And I'm reliably informed, another one of my stats here, that we've got approximately 470 bandy properties that will be affected by this out of about 65,000 properties in all. So it's a relatively small part of the council tax base, but obviously the most vulnerable one, and one we very much want to help. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, just that it will benefit about 4,000 people, which is not insignificant, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much. So we'll go to the recommendation, which is to recommend that council approve the introduction of a new income banded. Sorry.
So just to be clear, the cabinet is not approving this tonight. We're approving this can only be approved by full council, and so we're approving passing this on for consideration by full council.
Yeah, absolutely. So the recommendation is that council approve the introduction of a new income banded council tax support scheme for working age applications with effect from the 1st of April. So obviously won't happen until then. I assume you'd like to propose, Councillor Ferguson, yeah. Is that seconded? All those in favour? That's approved. And I thought that's a really good piece of work. Everyone involved in that. So thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just say it is an exceptional piece of work. When I took over this portfolio, there's something we wanted to do very early on, and about a year ago, we sat down and had a meeting with the then Amanda Burns, who was running the team then, and we sat in a room, and it seemed like a huge piece of work. And then Amanda took early retirement at Christmas, and it looked to me to be impossible because when we sat down and looked at it, there's about 1 million parameters you could twiddle to make this model work as well. Katie Kelly took over the team in March, and I think it's been an incredible piece of work to get this through the scrutiny process and hopefully approved by full council. So Barnes and Katie and everybody who works in that team, I am incredibly grateful for it, and also incredibly grateful that they've written a really clear and easy to understand paper for something which is quite complicated. So yeah, I'm completely in their debt as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. So we'll go to item 9, which is transfer of public open space policy. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies if I cough through this. I have been trying my best not to, as other people have spoken. Okay. So I just want to start with Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972 provides that a council may dispose of land in any manner which they wish, but they must do at best value. So if I go back to this policy, I will talk about policy in a minute, but this policy is separate from HDC's disposable of small land parcels. So those are what we class as surplus parcels. This policy is about open spaces. It's not about our surplus space. Our open spaces are not surplus. So when we talk about small land, that is another policy. That is at Appendix D. And also we've got HDC's acquisition of land and building policy, which is at Appendix E. So this is a totally separate policy. And it's to do with the process needed to deal with requests to take ownership and lease on HDC open spaces. This is over quarter of an acre, 0.25 of an acre. We have had in the past requests which have been quite complicated, with having no policy to follow. We haven't been able to progress. We've just gone into darkness. We haven't been able to progress or give any opportunity for any of these land transfers or leases. This will be HDC's protocol, which will enable consistent and swift decisions of any of the proposals. The policy demonstrates HDC will work closely with other local authorities for the benefit of our communities. This is in line with our corporate plan 23 to 28. So to enable and influence. I think what we've got to understand is that within this policy, yes, it is, we're talking about land transfer, but a lease or a license is a preferred enabler to support a third party to enhance the facilities of public open spaces owned by HDC. So we've got to understand that that is a less cost to us, to time constraints and resources on our officers to be able to offer this lease or a license as opposed to a transfer. It still will give us this outcome and delivers against our HDC corporate plan. HDC has a history of supporting local investments on its public open spaces by granting a license or a lease to other public bodies when that public body doesn't actually hold a suitable open space. HDC itself holds leases with other landowners. So we have Paxton Pits, which part of it, not all of it, Hitchinbrook Country Park and Burnham Park and Spring Common as well within Huntingdon. So yeah, that is it in a nutshell, really. And it's very robustly written, so I thank Neil for that. We have had 3 comments on overview and scrutiny. It was received well. One, Councillor Bywater praised the flowchart, which it brings the clarity to the process, and it is a very clear flowchart to read. If you're going down transfer at lease, and it shows an applicant where to go through this process. And then the other 2 were comments on basic clarity, saying, have we got land all ready to go? No, that isn't the case. This policy is there just in case we have an applicant that could do something really, fantastic with an open space. This policy is there to guide this applicant through. And thank you if there's any comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Any questions or comments from members at all? Councillor Pitt.
Just to say, I think this is really helpful. I know from experience, things like this come up more regularly than people might anticipate, and actually just to have a framework is going to solve a lot of expectation management as much as anything. So for the people that are interested in going down this route, they can see immediately what's in front of them. It's helpful for us, but equally helpful for other partners.
Thank you. I think it's good, as you said, we've had questions, haven't we, just in the last sort of 18 months. Queries about whether things can be done with the district council land, different ownership questions. So I think it's good to have a robust policy in place and a process by which people can, organisations, sometimes we get, requests, don't we, even from residents wanting to do things. So at least they, or parish councils, there's an off-the-shelf policy and process for them all to follow. So if there are no other questions or comments, we'll go to the recommendation. I won't read through all of it, but it's clearly set out at A and B, and I'll propose that we approve. Do I have a seconder at all? Councillor Pitt, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. That is approved. And that was the final item of business. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I don't have a gavel to bang, unfortunately, but if I did, I would probably do that, and wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you. Thank you to members and to officers. Take care. Thank you.